Hello friends, good morning and welcome to the EduSite Network. Our topic of discussion today is part of our section on culture is Indian clothing and Indian culture. So, we shall be talking about this specific topic today, and for this we have with us in our studio our subject expert Dr. Shankar Kumar, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Hindu College, University of Delhi. With this very brief introduction, I welcome sir and request him to begin our today's lecture. Thank you for coming, sir.
Thank you, Urvashi, and good morning, viewers. As stated, we shall be talking about clothing as some kind of a window to understand Indian culture. Of course, it cannot facilitate an understanding of Indian culture in a comprehensive way. Nevertheless, it's a very fruitful peep into Indian culture in the sense that quite a few dimensions of culture get somehow logged through the insight that clothing can offer. For instance, it can allow us to understand the economy to some extent or the economic issues to some extent, the kind of economic status that we generally associate with clothing. It can also facilitate some kind of understanding into the social norms and social customary habits and so forth. Gender issue can be fruitfully looked at through the clothing statements, through the clothing style, the pattern in which male and females over a long period of time dress in a culture. The point is that quite a few aspects of Indian culture can be fruitfully looked at through the window of clothing, and the way people dress can be a fascinating entry point into these issues. In fact, there is also an element of his particular historical setting in which all these economic, social and cultural forces are allowed to play. So, it is the historical context in which these aspects should be understood and looked at. For instance, when we look at the fabric of a particular dress which could have been in fashion or which could have been worn at a particular point of time in history by a particular section, by a particular community, then it gives us an insight into the economic standing of that community or that person or that group of people who dress themselves in that way. Similarly, the style of dressing, particular dresses were reserved for usage by certain section of people. There is an element of you can say honor, or there is an element of exclusivity which is associated with a particular kind of dress, insignia, the entire paraphernalia around it, the way it is to be carried and so forth, particular marks on those dress. They are indicative of the political status, or for that matter power status of the people who is putting on that dress. So, aristocratic dresses would be little bit different from the commoners or the plebeians and so forth. So, that is yet another aspect that we need to understand through dress habits or clothing as such. They are also political in nature. At times, dresses in history have been used to convey a very direct political message. It could be that of defiance, it could be that of protest, it could be that of some kind of striking awe amongst people and so forth. So, that is something which is also very interesting, particularly in Indian history. In fact, the world over, that has been a good kind of study look at the dress habits and the way people chose to dress in political circumstances as part of some political movement, so much so that the iconic French Revolution, if we are reminded of that, we get to see that the sans-culottes used to put on a particular kind of dress, and that was a deliberate attempt, it was a conscious attempt, it was not something which was bestowed to them as part of culture. So, they were not dressing themselves as per the custom, but they chose to dress themselves in contrast to the aristocratic style of dressing, and that was a mark of not only protest but also a sense of solidarity amongst the sans-culottes themselves. And who can forget our own Indian national movement, where khadi became such a potent and iconic mark of protest and self-reliance, and there is a plethora of political ideas entwined in the very act of putting on khadi during Indian struggle for independence in the past century. So, and the association of Gandhi, the way Gandhi himself dressed up, and that was not only important from sartorial point of view, but it was a very important political statement coming from a colonial country, and it did convey a great sense of you can say frustration amongst the colonial amongst the imperial masters, and it was at times very embarrassing for them, and thereby Gandhi also leveraged this particular thing as some kind of a moral force against the imperial masters, that is Britain. So, we do see that clothing is not only fabric and colors per se. Of course, we shall be trying to understand that aspect as well because of its economic underpinning and also the social conveying capacity in terms of the hierarchy, social hierarchy that we get to see. But it includes quite a few other things, as we just discovered in our discussion around the political connotation of dressing. Now, also important, if we adopt the pan-Indian perspective, then we find that there is a variety of dresses and dressing pattern that we encounter. And it's not only about the contemporary India, but all through history of India, we have seen that there is a fair degree of pertinence of say regions, also gender, or for that matter sex, historical age, technology, climate, weather conditions, social standing, economic standing, and also occasions. It could be festive occasions, it could be say somber, sad occasions like mourning, it could be happy occasions like marriage and so forth. So, all these provide some kind of a context to the way people dress themselves, and there is also an element of historical setting, that whether we are talking of say Harappan times, whether we are talking of Vedic times, and therefore religion and all other issues also comes into picture, or for that matter whether we are talking of the Sultanate period, Mughal period, British period, or contemporary Indian period, globalized scenario where quite a few things have undergone a change, and quite a few markers have also been obliterated and new ones having been created. So, reference to identity becomes yet another important component, because through dress at times in history we have seen that people tend to, or groups or communities tend to assert and fortify their identity, their political identity, social and economic identity as well. So quite a few things are all locked in the issue of dressing and clothing as such. There is also the issue of mixing of communities, which is which in Indian history has provided the instance of intermingling and hence syncretization of clothing. So, for instance, suppose there is a particular way, broad pattern in which the people in the say Islamic encounter in Indian history had been dressing, and once Sultanate was established for a good period of time, which was to stay for a good period of time in history, followed by the Mughals and so forth. So there is a continued interaction, and that also had its ramification not only in the field of art, architecture and other technologies, but also it is reflected in the way people dressed themselves. So there is fair degree of coming together of diverse traditions, be it the Rajasthani or Gujarati tradition mixing up with Islamic tradition of dressing, and the male dressing and the female dressing. They all underwent some kind of a change, and a new form came, which was lapped up by not only the Hindus but also Muslims. So there is some kind of coming together, acculturation happening in the realm of dressing and clothing as well. So that is yet another dimension that we should be exploring, keeping in view the dynamic aspect of clothing as such. We all are so well aware of the cheat. In Indian language we call it cheat, which is like some designs, spotted designs on the fabric, which became so popular in Europe during the East India's transactions with India or Indian merchants, Indian textile industry, Indian hand loom weavers and so forth, and it captured the fascination of the Europeans and British in particular, and it became very popular there, and that is something which we shall also try to look at, because it is not only generally we tend to believe that post the Industrial Revolution it is the factory produced mass textile which took over Indian textile as such, and or Indian textile tastes as such, and that is what was the formidable impact. But there is something to be had from Indian history in the reverse fashion as well. So you know, the color, the texture, the fabric, they all have played different kinds of a role in Indian history at different points of time. So the historical setting is actually very important here. Of course, there is a technological angle to it, as we just stated about the Industrial Revolution in the last quarter of the 18th century, when it began in Britain, and subsequent century in India had a very disturbing impact on Indian textile industry, and historians look at it in the form of deindustrialization as such. So all these issues we shall try to look at. Also important is the coming of the jacquard loom, which was a technological innovation in France, in Europe, say around 1804, 1805, and through this interchangeable punched cards could be used, and that greatly quickened the pace with which textiles could be made, and the weaving of cloth could be controlled and so forth. Also important is the arrival of the sewing machine, and the sewing machine also had a tremendous impact on the way fabrics were made and stitched into particular customized clothes. And we shall see how Indian middle class, or for that matter even aristocracy or the princes from the erstwhile princely states underwent this kind of a sartorial change, at times even offering very ridiculous kind of sartorial instances. If you look at the iconic photograph where the first meeting of the or when Indian National Congress was formed, and the delegates, 72 odd delegates are standing, which included quite a few from the middle class, professional English educated middle class, and also some princely representations from the princely states and so forth. You find a very interesting mix of Western clothing and the traditional clothing, and some innovations like dresses which defy frontiers. So they also came up, and that is something which is very much visible in that photograph of the first meeting at the Indian National Congress in 1885 and so forth. So these are some of the issues which are extremely important for us to understand as to the processes and the changing fashion of clothing, the kind of impact it generated, the kind of consequence that it itself reflected. So these are some of the issues. Also, if we take the world stage, although this discussion primarily is about Indian culture, but there is something which is more potent so far as clothing etc. are concerned, and that is technology, and also as I said, historical setting. So it has impacted the clothing style, the sartorial style, not only in India but across frontiers. For instance, if we take the world wars, the two world wars, World War I and World War II in the 20th century, beginning of the 20th century, we find across Europe and particularly in England, there is some kind of a change towards austerity and also utility clothes, and so austerity and utility clothes made a kind of entry into the clothing habits post the World War in Britain on account of the war exigencies. So particularly, the World War required the female folk to come out of their household activities and lend their services in, say, ordnance factories or armament factories or say medical aid services and so forth, which required them to be rather swift, and clothes could not afford to be restrictive so far as their movement are concerned. And so we find that the traditional robes, the traditional skirts which extended down up to the toes got shortened, and the hemline at least increased, say, in fact there was on an average one can say that it moved up by around 8 centimeters or so. So it did not touch the toe the way it did in the previous times, so as to allow frequent movement or allow mobility of women folk. And by 1927, in the interwar period, the period between the First World War and Second World War, it got further up, and it could barely reach the knees, and then we find appearance of stockings as a typical kind of Western dress. So skirt up to the knees, and then you have stocking, shoes, and so forth. Just to understand why such changes happened only at around this time is again the historical setting, and the way we explained that it meant that women folk had to come out of their household activities in the public sphere and do these services, lend these services, and since war was on, so austere measures were also very much in place, and hence long clothes had some kind of given way to these short clothes and so forth. Of course, there is an issue of fashion and several other pressures which do act, and we shall see how in the globalized world those factors also impact the sartorial preferences and choices of people. So there is an element of display, power, and so forth. Identity and so forth reflected in these, particularly in Indian context, very much, and we shall see as to what it also meant. Even the men's dress underwent these kinds of changes around this time, particularly after the world wars were over, and there was some kind of normalcy setting in. Sports came up in a big way, so we have some kind of a change coming from the compulsions of specific sports also. So we have the diversification of sports or recreational activities adding to the forces that shaped sartorial changes. For instance, exercising required or health consciousness. So morning jogging or evening jogging required different kind of a dress. Different sports required different outfits. Swimming required a different outfit. Leisure time. So that also meant that accordingly the clothes were to be stitched. Cycling, sleeping dress became different from the usual dress that people put on. Parties and occasions. So all these factors did influence clothing in a particular way, to the extent that now with the rise of the feminist movement and we can say greater awareness about feminine issues and the need to overcome the gap. There are style statements coming through unisex clothes. So you have clothes where the issue of gender is completely obliterated, and that can be put on by males and females alike. And in several departmental stores, you can find unisex dresses present in a great variety these days. So these are some of the issues which actually, if we look at it in a chronological fashion, there is some sense of history and the changes registered across the historical phases that gets reflected in the way people dressed up and the way fashion changed over a period of time. Now, if we look at the history of Indian clothing as such, of course, one thing that strikes us right at the beginning is the multiplicity, the sheer multiplicity of the clothing styles. There is also the issue of syncretic, or we can say assimilation of different traditions, leading to a different kind of cloth altogether, becoming fashionable, becoming very common for males and females alike in history, and we have instances of that. Also, there is the issue, as we just spoke about, the issue of assertion of power, challenging the authority, or inspiring some kind of a social change. So there is particular way in which people dressed up, and Gandhi, as we said, is a very good example, and Khadi during the Indian national movement, or the Gandhi topi, or the particular way in which people dressed up as independence fighters and so forth. So they all added quite a bit of a dimension to Indian clothing as such. Now, since we are adopting this historical perspective, Harappan period, if we talk of, I'm leaving aside the prehistoric part of Indian history, and straightway beginning from the civilizational phase. And although we don't have enough material to understand the sartorial aspect of Harappan life, because we don't have written records as such, so we can't work out the frequency or the social dimension of it, but quite a few instances are there which allow us some kind of a glimpse into the way people could have dressed. For instance, there are terracotta figurines coming from Harappa and Mohenjo-daro and several other sites of Harappa, which do give us some kind of an idea as to how their dress could have been. There is Mother Goddess and several other terracotta figurines. There is a typical bronze statue of Harappan times, belonging to the Harappan times, which is designated by a particular archaeologist as the dancing girl. And although it appears to be nude, but there are very visible signs of the way people put on jewelry or bangles, the females, the way they put it on, and that also gives us some kind of an example as to how people could have been dressing. For instance, in this bronze dancing girl statue, we find that the entire arm, not only the fore, but even the upper arm is covered by very thick bangles. And this is something which is a living tradition in Rajasthan area even today. The women folk do put on bangles which are very bold and thick, and they cover the entire arm of human body, and that is exactly the way the bronze dancing girl is dressed up. So that is one. Then since we did speak of power, authority and so forth getting reflected through the dresses, there is that stone statue of probably either a priest or a king coming from Harappan civilization, very close to the iconic Great Bath. And that's where it was found to be located, and definitely it must have been a public figure. Again, archaeologists have labeled it as the priest king. Now, there is nothing written around that bust figure, but these impressions about that person or the identity of that person as a priest or a king is entirely made on the basis of his dressing pattern. So the person is depicted with half the eyes closed, and it appears that he is in some kind of a meditative posture or is a thinking person, and therefore this assertion of priest. Similarly, the cloth that he has put on is covered across the shoulder, the typical way in which we as Indians put on shawl across our shoulders, and there are some designs made over it. and that also is reflective of the priestly air around that person. So, this epithet of priest, but at the same time across the forehead there is some kind of an insignia, which is like a kind of cloth band put around the forehead, which was a Mesopotamian practice for the kings. So, here also historians and archaeologists are led into believing that maybe that this is some kind of a royal insignia, and that could have been the practice in Harappan period as well. Although we don't have written records to certify this, to substantiate this assertion, but such insignia, such sartorial exclusive fashion is something which is a logical thing to understand the meaning behind such statements. And so, the king aspect of the identification of that statue as king is made entirely on account of that insignia around the forehead, which is part of clothing as such. So, the point that we are making here is that the sheer sartorial style allows us to make some guesses, some intelligent guesses about the identity of an archaeological finding of an unidentified statue as such, which on account of its own self does not proclaim who that person is. But for historians, the sartorial aspect becomes important to identify them or to make some kind of a logical guess around it. We also have several seals from where some depictions can be seen with reference to the clothing pattern, and that tells us that Harappans were using not only unstitched clothes, which is almost a marker of Indian civilization. Males and females across Indian history have been using unstitched clothes in a profuse way or degree. And there is some sense of religiosity also associated in Hindu culture. For instance, stitching of clothes is or stitched clothes is not put on important pious religious occasions or ceremonies. So, at times during these ceremonies, the person who is sitting for that puja or worship is advised to put on or cover his or her body with unstitched clothes. So, there is that religious connotation to that as well. But during the Harappan times, it seems that people were using not only unstitched clothes, but also stitched clothes. And in material terms, we do have evidence of cotton textile or cotton making, cotton clothes. Very much in use. Cotton was cultivated also during the Harappan times, and weaving was an exercise which is very much attested during the Harappan times. Wool was also profusely used, and the sheep herders, particularly from the Indo-Iranian plateau area, had a formidable impact on the Harappan culture. And so, wool making, cotton making is something which is almost identified with Harappan civilization. And coming to the Vedic times, we find that textile techniques and designs are given particular lexicon, and that tells us that the way people dressed up had acquired more variety now. And there is ample literary evidence in the Vedic texts about the way people dressed up, or the way people were advised to dress up on particular occasions, be it sacrificial occasions or other religious occasions as such. So, that tells us about the Vedic times, whereas by the time we reach the end of the Vedic period or the beginning of say 6th century BC, which is a very interesting and happening kind of century in Indian history, we again find clothing habits getting transformed. And it is not only the landscape which gets transformed on map, but the sartorial aspect of people also undergoes a change. So we tend to identify 6th century BC with the process of urbanization in a big way. So quite a few urban centers start dotting Indian political map. Similarly, there is advent of heterodox religious movements in the form of Buddhism, Jainism, Ajivikas and so forth, and they were also identified with a particular kind of dress. So a Buddhist bhikshu would dress himself in a particular way, or there is also that element of color. So the Gerua Vastra that we talk of is actually coming from here. And so much so that since we spoke of the urban centers or urban proliferation, which is also understood in Indian history as the second urbanization, the first urbanization being identified with Harappan urbanization. So this second phase of urbanization that Indian history underwent also included Kashi, and which is adjacent to Banaras, or we can say ancient name of Banaras as such. Now Kashi as a center today, we tend to associate it with religiosity, temples, or for that matter Kashi Banaras University, and quite a few other markers can be used to identify the city at present. But this religious identity was a later day development actually. If we look at the etymology of this term itself, it probably the root word is shaum, and shaum meant the same Gerua Vastra that we put on the saffron cloth, and it is this word which got transformed in spoken language as Kashi, so shaum to Kashi. And it is the manufacturing center. Kashi is emerging as the manufacturing center around 6th century BC. So it is not the religious identity which is prominent in 6th century BC, the period of its origin, and it is only subsequently that the place got identified with a particular religion and as the pilgrimage center and so forth. So again we find how important the identity of Kashi is with reference to the clothing style as such. So that is how the Buddhist bhikshus and bhikshunis or Jain ascetic tradition took up a particular form of dress, and that added to the variety that we tend to associate with 6th century BC in terms of clothing habit. Already we have seen that of course urban people would dress themselves a little bit differently, traders would dress themselves a little bit differently as compared to the rural masses, which was the order of the day in the Vedic times. So also important from the point of view of 6th century BC is the emergence of the guilds, that is Shrenis, the trade guilds, the merchant guilds and so forth. Urban setting we have already spoken of. Luxury items, trade in luxury items. Now, this is again an extra dimension that gets added to the clothing style in 6th century BC, because luxury trade was possible in 6th century BC. So there is Uttarapath, Dakshinapath, long caravans, huge caravans of traders and merchants are stated to be crisscrossing the entire landscape, particularly north of the Vindhyas mountains in what we identify today as North India as such. So all these factors influenced the way people dressed, the sheer range in the sartorial aspect and so forth. And by the time we reach the Mauryan period. Of course, the state is getting more and more organized, so trade is becoming more organized, and we do get evidence, very solid evidence of trade intercourse with the Greco-Roman world. We also have diplomatic contact with the Greek world in the Mauryan times, and that could have added to the extra sophistication during the Mauryan period. And some of the sculptural remains, the iconic Yaksh and Yakshini figures that we have from the Mauryan times. One such figure was excavated from or found from Didarganj in Bihar, close to Patna. And that tells us about the particular way in which ladies could have dressed themselves, and it does tell us about well, we can't make much out of the fabric, or it could have been some kind of style statement also, but it does tell us the way people dress themselves. And of course, given the sophistication of these sculptural traditions, there is some kind of an inference that we can make with reference to their clothing habits as well. And subsequent to it, we come to the Kushana period, around the time of the Common Era, beginning of the Common Era. We have proliferation of that age is known in Indian history as an age of proliferation of overseas contacts, foreign trade. Kushana themselves were from Central Asia, who had been exercising control over a greater part of North India, extending up to Mathura and even western part or central part of present-day Uttar Pradesh. So the entire area was under their command, and that meant that the dressing habit could have undergone a change. That figure, that broken figure of probably a king, it could be Kanishk, that we get displays the dressing habit in contrast to the traditional ways in which Indian kings used to dress themselves. So we have long coat, boot, and different way in which people or for that matter the king dressed himself, and that tells us about the contrasting traditions and the intermixing, maybe that like other dimensions Indian history, for instance the coin making or gold coins and so forth, or satrap tradition of administration, which we tend to identify with the Kushanas, which subsequently was taken up in a big way as a part of Indian tradition itself. It got merged into Indian tradition seamlessly. Similarly, the dressing habit could have also merged into the subsequent Indian tradition in a big way. So these aspects are important as important historical moments where these transformations happened. We have the Gandhar and Mathura art sculpturing and art traditions developing around this time, around the turn of the Common Era, and Gandhar and Mathura art display to a great degree the influence from the Greco-Roman world and the Central Asian traditions, and the ultimate presentations were always in the form of Indian cultural traditions, the mythological aspects of India's past, or the substance that it actually was made of were all local. Whereas the style of presentation, of course, did have fair degree of influence from the Greek tradition and overseas traditions. For instance, the Buddha figure that we are so familiar with, and Buddha's image, if you see, hardly looks like someone from Nepal. We all know that Buddha was born in Nepal, and his entire life he roamed around the present day Bihar and eastern Uttar Pradesh. So there is Patliputra, Gaya, Kapilavastu, or for that matter the eastern Uttar Pradesh area, Sarnath. So all these areas and the way Buddha is presented in Gandhar or Mathura sculptural tradition with sharp nose and the clothing style, they all do display great familiarity with the Hellenistic tradition, because it is around this time that this contact was very much live, and in fact Gandhar and Mathura tradition were born of these historical settings. So there is that kind of overt influence. For instance, the clothes that Buddha is said to have put on is almost transparent, and one can see the muscular formations beneath the cloth that he is putting on in these stone sculptures, and that was the typical way in which Hellenistic tradition depicted people or clothes as such. And but also important is the fact that this transparency or translucent clothes that we are talking of here, we do have instance literary evidence actually belonging to this period, where the Roman king around the turn of the century, around the turn of the Common Era, is complaining in the Roman world about the heavy Indian imports of textiles, and it becomes a moral issue for them. They say that the clothes procured from India are so fine and so transparent that female bodies are hardly covered, and they hardly reveal, they hardly cover female organs, and it becomes a moral issue for them that Indian clothes should not be promoted, because it is leading to some kind of an ethical issue for them. And that tells us about the fine quality of Indian textile Indian clothes which were imported into the Roman world around this time. And this is again about the issue of technology and also the refinement in Indian textile tradition that we get to see around this time. In the Gupta period, of course, we have a variety of, since sources are varied, we have a variety of dress patterns. We have Uttariya, Antariya, we have Kaya Bandhan, we have gowns, we have tunics, we have blouses with buttons, we have skirts, pajamas, quilted clothes, kaftans, high boots. They all make their presence in the Gupta period. And we have texts like Amar Kosh and Brihad Kalpa Sutra Bhashya, from where we can get good kind of evidence, a number of evidence related to the sartorial aspect of Indian past. And therefore, in today's discussion, we have come up to the Gupta period, and when I get an opportunity, I shall try to take it from here down to the present times across the Sultanate and Mughal period, where different kind of acculturation happened, reflected in the sartorial aspect of Indian past, the British experience, the British impact, and then the post-colonial or the global context in which we all are familiar with the way we put on our dress. And of course, we shall weave in the issue of regions, the weather conditions, technology, etc. in the course of our discussion that we shall have subsequently.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. And friends, this was our lecture on clothing and Indian culture, and we shall be back more to talk about that as well. So with this, we thank our subject expert. Thank you, sir, for being here today, and thank you, friends. Wonderful lecture we had. So have a wonderful day ahead again. Thank you.